Hi everyone, and welcome to the Orchestrator meeting for today. I have a pretty small agenda for today. So I'm a bit dependent on you coming up with topics, but I guess that's okay. So the first thing on the agenda I have is so for Quincy we should look into making the Ceph ADM exporter, aka Ceph ADM agent or Ceph ADM daemon, a bit more well engineered, a bit more, looking into it again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my idea is to just look into that thing and then see what needs to be done or what should be done in order to make it work. And dissecting this task a bit more and then come up with a more detailed plan of what needs to be done here. That's a topic that needs to be done for Quincy, so I don't see a rush to immediately start working on it. That gives us a bit more leeway in order to dissect this issue a bit more.
Yeah, I think I would wait a little bit before tackling that because there are a couple other issues that I think we should address first.
Yeah.
One thing about that, okay? Just to propose how to do the thing. I think that it could be very, very interesting for everybody to investigate and to analyze how to implement this feature, okay? But the thing important is that maybe what we need is just to provide to the team a good description of the feature. This is what we want. This is the target that we want to achieve. This is the more or less the guidelines that we need to follow, or the things that we need to study in order to do this in the right way. And then just let the team to think about that and start and just to have one of our meetings in order to everybody together start to dissect and to split the feature in several tasks and discuss how we can implement in a collaborative way this the feature. So
yeah, I think it totally makes sense, right? We don't need to do that for every feature, for everything that we need to care about, but I think this one would be an example where we can actually do that.
Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah.
Things like refactoring the existing code, things like looking into different architectures of how the communication between the manager and the daemon is going to look like, stuff like that, you know?
Yeah.
Do we want to schedule a different meeting for that, or do we just want to reuse the Orchestrator meeting? I have the impression that it would probably make sense to have a different meeting because the audience is just maybe not completely fitting. I think it's just an engineering only issue.
Yeah.
Where we should do that. Okay.
I agree with that. Just to share one thought, okay? Let's open another path in order to define these kind of things, okay? Let's say the other path, but I think that in order to define the guidelines and the things that we need to implement, well, I think that Sage and Sebastian could have the lead voice here in order to define the main guidelines, okay? And after that, we can use the Etherpad in order to ask more things, okay? And in 1 week, 2 weeks, I don't know, maybe after probably downstream release, we can start to implement that.
Okay.
Or to split the task.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, I will come up with an invitation. Okay, for the group that is also in a stand up. That's okay for you, Rebecca?
For me, it's great. Very happy if we do the things in this way.
Perfect. Okay. Containerized Ceph. Who came up with that topic? Who's yellow?
Yeah. Myself. So
Yes.
yeah, we have continued with this try from the dashboard team just to see if we can come up with a containerized Ceph ADM, because right now the way that we are testing that is with KCLI, which is basically libvirt. So it's a VM running Ceph ADM, and that's not very performant. And we also wanted to have this if possible, in the API test in Jenkins. So probably containerized deployment could better work rather than a VM based. So right now I managed to do that with a Docker in Docker approach. I started trying Podman. Podman, I think there are still many missing loose ends just to do this in Podman. And we also try the different approaches like mapping the socket for the Docker, but that doesn't work because you'd have to share the file system between the different levels of the containerization. So I think this is probably the cleaner approach right now. I think from Postman, I recently checked a presentation from some Red Hat folks, so they are also pushing on this, on having Podman in Podman. So we might have something sooner. But right now, the only way I managed to do that was with Docker in Docker. And of course, the root Docker, not rootless. So, you need to run the daemon and the service, everything. So that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was running some tests. It failed during the host add, but everything else worked. So I think I have to install the SSHD service, and hopefully next week I can give a demo if I manage to get something working.
So you actually installed the SSHD service within a Docker container?
Inside, yeah.
Wow, cool.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Right now, it's a systemd container, CentOS based, and it has also Docker C running on it. So you need these 3 pieces. You want to run that. I'm not sure if we could try to make the Ceph ADM requirements more lightweight, just not to require systemd, maybe cronny or so. Okay.
I guess we need systemd within a container, right?
I'm just confused what the purpose of this is. This is just so we can run a test, right?
Yeah.
Can't we just do it on the host? I mean, the way that Ceph ADM works, it already has a very small footprint on the host. Like it puts a couple systemd unit files, but you can clean those up in an automatic, safe way at the end.
Yeah. We might try to do that. The other thing is that if we want to add more hosts, we'll need different I'm saying laptops because our unit of development is a laptop. So this way we could add more containers to the deployment, and also perhaps add different clusters, having a single laptop or a computer, multiple clusters. If we manage to
Ceph ADM does do that. Ceph ADM already is really good about isolating itself from other instances. By default, it'll start putting stuff in etc Ceph, but you can just add one argument, it'll stop doing that. You tell it what directory to install the file in.
Okay.
I think the only thing you can't do is multiple hosts.
Yeah, and you need to avoid deploying the monitoring stack.
One question, but when you deploy with Ceph ADM, is not putting some unit files in your systemd in your laptop?
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
But
But you can delete
wouldn't
those.
be better to have an isolated environment so it doesn't mess up with your system D also, apart from multiple clusters, multiple hosts?
I think it's yes, but at what cost, right? Like it sprinkles like 3 files, maybe 4 files in /etc. There's like a systemd unit file, there's a log rotate file, and there's some stuff in varlog and varlib. But they're all tagged by the UUID, and there's one Ceph8m command, rm cluster, that will wipe it all out. And so, yes, it puts stuff on your host, but it also cleans it up for you. Having a completely isolated environment, sure, that's better, but like, are we going to spend weeks of engineering time like getting podman and podman working? Is it worth it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, let's see.
Yeah.
I think this might be useful for at least for development and testing as well. In the CI and Jenkins, I think it might make easier to run this, and probably the cleanup is going to be simpler. If we just by removing the container, you get rid of all the stuff that is there. And also, if we manage to mount volumes, we could also, instead of having to build containers for every changing master, we could directly test our changes, mounting volumes. So it will be a bit complex just to mount a volume inside different containers, but if that works, we were also doing that for KCLI, basically. So we were passing a volume through libvirt and Docker.
Okay.
Our code inside. So okay, so that's mostly it from my side.
But look, you are crazy. But awesome, Ernesto, Alfonso, incredible.
If someone is interested in joining and trying this, yeah, feel free.
Do you have the code somewhere already pushed?
No, it is very simple right now. I can quickly share my screen, but I may post this to some PR. So do you see my terminal? So it's just this Docker file. So pretty simple right now. I will have to add sshd as well, but it's mostly it. And the line for running this is Docker run. I'm planning to do this in Docker Compose because probably I will have to create volumes. So yeah, it requires privilege and probably will require some caps. But yeah, I think it's not that complicated so far.
I mean, if it really simplifies dealing with multiple hosts, I mean that would be a use case, right? I, for one, wouldn't use it to just spin up a cluster on one host because I'm confident enough in how Ceph8m cleans up itself that I wouldn't use it for one host. But for multiple hosts, I think there is a use case.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, but please share the code. Put it somewhere.
Yeah. Any clue where this might go?
Would probably make sense to have it in the tree, right? At some point, maybe not today, but in the tree in general, eventually.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll share as soon as possible. Yeah.
Okay. Removing contaminants from server specs.
Yeah, we talked about this. We talked about this a few days ago. I can't remember. I think what we decided was that we wanted to have a single way to specify images, and for Ceph daemons, that's the config option.
Yeah.
And so I think for all Ceph daemons, we can remove the image property, but for the monitoring daemons, what did we decide? We decided we could also do it there because there's no case where we want to have separate images, inner images on different daemons, and so we can still just set the config option.
We still have a config option.
Yeah,
for
but
the other.
It's a property on the manager though. It's a manager config option.
Yeah.
As opposed to like a config option on that particular instance of the service or daemon. which is fine. It just means it's global as opposed to like granular, but I don't think we need granular images on Prometheus daemons. We're not going to run multiple Prometheus containers. So I think, yeah. So I think, all right. So I think I can just go and remove all those from the service specs. Well, the reason I guess the other question is they are there partly also because in the Rook case, those container image is different.
They have to be there in the Rook case. No, they don't have to. But Rook doesn't use the config values of Ceph ADM for the container images.
Right. They're different.
Rook uses the custom resources to store the path to the container images compared to the config options used by Ceph ADM. So if we would completely remove the container image Prometheus config from the module, then we could leverage the server spec exclusively, I guess. But does it make sense?
I don't know if it makes sense because we never use Prometheus anyway. Because in the Rook case, the manager Rook case, you wouldn't use the Prometheus apply from the orchestrator anyway, because it's already going to exist outside of Rook's control in the Kubernetes environment, right?
And we only have Prometheus, Grafana, Alert Manager, Node Exporter, HA Proxy, and Keep Alive as separate container images. Everything else is the base image. So
yeah, I mean, we'll have a Samba image and a Ganesh. No, we don't have a Ganesh. But yeah, right. Yeah. Anyway, they're all Ceph ADM specific ones. So
is Samba going to be installed in the base image?
I'm guessing it won't be. I'm guessing it'll be a separate Samba image.
Yeah, because of the Samba.
It has a little VFS thing, but I don't know.
Operator, right?
Unclear. That's a little bit. That's under discussion. I have a feeling that we won't want to do it with Ceph ADM. It'll be whatever. Anyway. Okay, so should I go ahead and remove all those then?
It's just two, right? Where else do we store the container image in this spec?
I thought there were a bunch of them, but I might be wrong. But yeah, I'll just double check and make sure they're all gone.
There is one container image. That's the custom container service.
Yeah.
Well, we have to make it part of the service spec.
Yeah, that's okay.
Because it's just an abstracted invocation of Podman, more or less.
Yep.
For everything else, I think we're good.
So,
okay.
Summarizing.
Okay.
Sorry. Just one image that we are going to use for any kind of Ceph daemon, okay? And we are going to have the possibility to specify image in the case of the monitoring stack. That is going to be possible?
Yeah, it's already possible. Yeah, I just looked and it looks like the only place it actually still exists is the Ingress. The only one, I think.
Okay, Ingress and monitoring stack. Yes. Okay.
Perfect. No, monitoring stack does not have the image property in the service.
Right, exactly. Stack. The only one I have to remove is from the Ingress.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the custom container one obviously is going to steer.
Okay.
While you're doing that, can you also remove or make sure that the redeploy case daemon action redeploy here. This is not going to work. For the monitor, for everything else that's not using the base image. Because it's explicitly doing stuff like Ceph out daemon redeploy name.
Okay, yeah, I'll take a look.
That doesn't work for the monitoring things. So either we make it possible,
Yeah.
or we don't. I guess either one works, but we shouldn't avoid allowing dash image for monitoring services if that isn't implemented.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Okay, NFS.
Oh, that's already done here. Perfect. That's already done. Okay, NFS.
So the problem is, there are a couple of problems. The first problem is that if you deploy NFS by itself, you'll get one Ganesha instance. It'll bind to a random IP, as it'll be a random host that it's assigned to. So it's mostly useless in and of itself, until you set up the ingress service in front of it. But in order to set up the ingress service, you need to provide a virtual IP that ingress is going to bind to, and possibly some other options. So the Ceph NFS cluster commands just don't really make a lot of sense unless we add a whole bunch of arguments. And if we were going to add a whole bunch of arguments, we really want to do that, or do we really want to, or should we just tell the orchestrator to do it? I would lean towards the orchestrator, but actually what we also need to do is make it work. There needs to be something simple that has just the right information that the dashboard can do to deploy and to create an NFS cluster. And that needs to work with Rook too. But on Rook, there is no support for the ingress thing yet for NFS, because on Rook, NFS is only usable from within Kubernetes. It's not, you can't access the NFS from outside the Kubernetes cluster. Unless you go and figure out what random IP it used and then try it, and maybe depending on what networking model for your cluster, it may or may not work. I think usually it won't. So I think what we want is that I also don't understand yet if you're doing this correctly in Kubernetes and you use the ingress route whatever thing, do you give it an arbitrary public IP and provide that to Kubernetes, and then it sets up all the routes? Or does Kubernetes dynamically assign something out of a pool of public IPs that it has? Or is it optional, one or the other? That's not clear to me how that
I
works.
think you're connecting to the hosts using the host IP.
In Kubernetes.
I guess in multiple ways, right?
Yeah. I mean, inside Kubernetes, there's the service, which is basically just a way to name it, as far as I can tell, and that's a use of some funny virtual IP thing going on, virtual networking inside the Kubernetes cluster, whatever container network system. But that's only usable by other pods, so it's actually, and there's no point to using NFS inside Kubernetes unless it's like a Windows container or something random that doesn't speak Cephs. It's a very limited value, I think. I don't know. That, I'm not, yeah, it's sort of an incomplete. So I guess I wonder if, I mean, maybe the thing to do is like the dashboard to be like create an NFS cluster, and there's like a checkbox that says like make this externally accessible with this virtual IP, and that also then deploys ingress on top. And if it doesn't do that, then it'll just deploy the cluster without ingress. Like it seems like maybe that's the right user interface, because there's some Ceph ADM use cases where maybe you don't want ingress, although I can't really imagine what they would be. But in Kubernetes case, there might have containers that want to access NFS. And you don't need a publicly externally accessible route.
One question is,
Yeah.
I have put a link in the chat about the definition of a service in Kubernetes. Okay, this is the kind of thing that I don't know if we have in this moment in Rook in order to provide this external IP for the NFS daemon.
I think the key thing is that, in my understanding is that in Kubernetes, this is and a service isn't external; it's an internal cluster.
Yep.
It's external.
No.
Internal.
No. It's internal.
You want
it's
ingress
internal
if
only.
you go down. If you go down farther, on the left-hand side, go down to ingress. Ingress is what gives you an external.
Okay.
Thing.
Okay.
So there's an ingress resource.
Yes. Yes,
there
that's
you
it.
don't have. Yeah, but there's no. I don't see an IP in there. I don't know. I don't know how you like name it.
There is a graphic I think that is very illustrative in what is ingress. Okay, and it seems that yes, the service is available in only the cluster, but if you need to access this service, you need to use ingress. So in this case, what we are saying is that if the possibility that we will need to add to Rook the ingress service for NFS.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then I have a question. I think that's the right. Okay, so I think that's the right way to do it, to make that you deploy NFS with or without ingress, basically, which I think makes logical sense. It sort of captures all the use cases. It's not super complicated. The dashboard can be sort of opinionated when it like pre-checks the box for you or doesn't. I think the second question then is this Ceph NFS cluster set of commands, are those of any value, or should we just drop them and have the dashboard just use it directly?
We have
directly.
The very same problem already in the volumes module. I think it's called Ceph new or Ceph volume new or so. How do you make and that is creating pools. How do you make one pool an erasure-coded pool without creating a billion arguments to that command?
Yeah, I think you make it so that you can pass in pre-existing pools if you want to pre-create them.
But
does it not do that?
Weird user interface.
It does that already. There are two optional arguments, a metadata pool and a data pool, that you don't.
Yeah.
Oh no, sorry, that's FS new. FS volume. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
You can define pool names, I guess, or you can pre-create them.
I think yeah.
Wouldn't it make sense to make it the other way around? Make it possible for the orchestrator to call FS new or NFS cluster create?
I guess it doesn't seem like this is a problem with what module's doing what. It's a question of how we want the CLI to work. Because FS volume create is basically creating the pools, creating the file system, and then deploying the MDS cluster. And you can do those three things independently on your own, or you can do the opinionated, do everything at once. I think if we really want to capture the custom data pool, metadata pool thing, we should just add a thing that lets you pass in existing pools, add arguments to the FS1 create, because I think that's all there is. In the NFS case, it just seems like a gap on that FS new. In the NFS case, though, I mean, we could do the same thing, right? We could say when you do NFS cluster create, you could also specify a flag that says with or without ingress, and if there is ingress, then you have all the arguments for it. But yeah.
That seems something very, very sensible, I think.
I think what's a little bit different about NFS though is that it's not doing anything beyond, like it literally, NFS create is literally Ceph orch apply NFS name and Ceph orch apply ingress NFS dot name and then backend service. Like there aren't really that many other things that it's doing. But I guess it is whatever, just does streamline it. Yeah, it links the two together.
One
Ingress has a couple
question.
of properties that need to be passed.
One question, Sage. When the NFS module is executing the orchestrator commands, maybe the way, probably it is going to be more easy instead of using several orchestrator commands to create a spec with the ingress definition and to do in just one command, okay, in order to avoid these kind of things. So
that's basically what I'm thinking. Like it feels like the dashboard shouldn't be using a CLI that has opinions. It should just be using the actual thing. Like this is the tests that I've been using. They're pretty simple. This orch apply. This. Like it's just these two specs. And I mean, this networks isn't even really needed. The only thing it really does is it, in a pool, I'm removing the need for the pool. So it has opinion. All you really need to do is specify a non-default port for the NFS if you're going to have ingress, so that the ingress can run on the regular port. Make this here. Yeah, I think that's about it. You know what I mean?
Hey, one question from the dashboard. Maybe it's just needed to use the NFS command, NFS cluster create, and with the parameters, okay? And and is the NFS module the one that is going to be responsible to create the spec file? Is that what you are proposing?
Well, I'm trying to think through this because I guess we also want a simple experience for somebody using the CLI and not the dashboard. And for them, they would basically do Ceph orch apply NFS, blah, 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 and then they do Ceph orch apply ingress service, NFS.foo, full IP, whatever it is.
For ingress, I would really suggest you use the YAML way.
Yeah.
The CLI is getting so complicated if you have more than 3 arguments. No one will get it. That's my take.
Right. So if that's the case, then basically we have no ingress API. And instead we would do this NFS cluster create IP thing. I know it's just the opinion. It's just very opinionated. Want something else? Use YAML.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think not this. Right? We don't want Orch apply to call NFS cluster create. Because it turns out that NFS cluster create, it actually does do something. It creates the pool and it creates the empty config file. But I just made the orchestrator do that, actually, so that you can call the orchestrator directly. But I guess, yeah, we could refactor that. So it just calls a helper in the NFS thing that says like prepare.
Instead of creating the pool yourself, you can create a cluster. Why not?
Yeah.
Why have that code in two places?
Yeah. So I'll just call it in. I'll call into the NFS module
Yes.
to do it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. NFS module is off by default. We should probably turn it on by default, I think.
You can also import the NFS module
Directly instead of.
Yeah.
Oh,
And call
yeah.
it.
Yeah, it'd be easier. Yeah, I'll do that. Okay. Okay. And then whenever we get to Rook, we need to teach Rook how to do ingress for NFS someday. But there's like so much stuff to do for Rook that it's like, I'm not sure that's at the top of the list yet.
It's a bit scary to make Rook be on par with Cephadium. I mean, not the Rook module, but Rook itself.
I'm thinking the Rook module would probably do it. I don't think Rook needs to do it. But it could. I don't know. It's up to them. I don't really care if they think it's in scope or not.
I want to start with to work with that. Okay. Once we have more clear things in Ceph EDM, I want to start to be focused more in the Rook module.
Yeah.
And also in the Rook part. So
and making sure that there's parity. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that we need resources taking a look to that continuously, because in this moment there is a big gap in functionality and a big gap about stability, okay? Because even we don't know if everything is working or not in this moment. So
we really need a tautology integration of the Rook Manager module.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's so needed.
Which I think that basically amounts. I think the biggest part there is just a tautology task that installs Kubernetes.
Yep.
Okay.
One more comment on NFS. Alfonso had to leave, but he wanted to bring in a discussion. He's been talking with Barsha because some discrepancy in behavior that I think it's Rook related when creating the this module option for the dashboard, the Ganesha pool name with the namespace, etc.
Oh,
so I'm not sure if there is any difference in the way that's handled by the orchestrator for Ceph EDM or for Rook, or what's their issue there?
But that's the other thing I was changing in this NFS pull request I'm working on, is just making it opinionated. I can't think of any reason why we'd ever want to use a custom pool for the Ganesha daemons or like any of that. I just making it. I mean, I think that there's still a property on the spec, but all the CLI commands would just assume the default, and so you would never change it unless you. We could even remove the reason to totally change it, but basically making it so that there's an NFS Ganesha pool that always is the pool that has the Ganesha configs in it, and each daemon is in a little namespace of that pool for their configs, and they're always named. The namespace is always named after the service name for the NFS server, and just whatever, just making it all standardized. Because that way we can drop those. I think those are probably there were some arguments for some of the config options that or for some of the CLI to specify the pool name, and whatever. The user should never be asked to provide any of that information. Yeah. The only sort of bump I hit is I wanted to name it .nfs Ganesha, but the current default is NFS Ganesha, and there are already like a million places in the test code and other places where it assumes that name, and so if I rename it, then I have to change it in a bunch of places. Not clear to me if we should make it a dot, because it's like sort of an internal thing, kind of like the dot manager pool and the dot RGW pools. But I don't know. It probably doesn't really matter.
Ceph Ansible allows you to change the pool name, as far as I know.
Yeah, there's just no reason to do it. Right. It's just one more string that the user's like, what should I put here? I don't know. And then they put something that's confusing, like it, whatever. If the pool is always NFS Ganesha, then you know what it's for. And if the namespace always matches the service ID, then you always know what's what.
Yeah.
And then we're done.
Yeah, I think the use case for Ceph Ansible was OpenStack Manila, if I'm not wrong. So maybe they are specifically using a pool name for that, or
I have a meeting with him in 15 minutes. I mean, I can ask.
Yeah, that'd be good. Because we can, if it's a permissions thing, like we can restrict the Ganesha daemon so it only has access to that namespace of that pool, so they can still be locked, isolated. They shouldn't need, yeah, it shouldn't matter. In fact, we probably want to, right now, I don't think we're probably giving him access. Probably want to do that at some point, but. Okay, I think that answers all my questions on NFS.
Okay.
And I'm inclined to kick the OSD thing till later. I like just rebased the pull request and started looking at it, and then had a whole bunch of questions. But
let's focus on NFS for now. Make it, get it in.
Yep. Okay.
How can I or us help with the OSD memory limit?
I can push what I have right now, and you can take a look. Push me to Ceph. It's basically rebased, but that's it. I'm not sure. I guess we should talk about it. So there's the last patch adds this section to the service spec, so you can limit resources via the spec. I can't decide if that. I can't decide if that's something we want to do or not. I'm thinking maybe not in this, for the same reasons with the images, where we want to have one way to do things. And I think the best way to do it is going to be for auto-tuning OSD memory. If the config option is true, then we should have CephADM update the config option that sets the memory target. That way, there's transparency. You can see what the thing is set to via the big database, and then that's it. Yeah, and if you really want to have a spec file that like turns this on or sets specific limits, then they can set config options in the spec file, as opposed to like having a top-level property to do it. I'm not really sure that that's a use case that we even really care about that much.
We need it in a spec file if we have multiple servers for the same type having different values, right?
Well, no, because well, for OSDs, yes, because the OSD specs are like all weird.
Yes.
But for other things, that's not. I mean, I don't. It feels like the thing. It's. I think the simplest implementation is going to be basically the first 3 patches of the current pull request drop the resources thing that I added in that last patch. And then basically say we add a config option that says auto-tune true false for the OSD. And if it's true, then Ceph ADM will basically look at the host memory, look at the number of OSDs, and it will set a config option, Ceph big set OSD host equals foo, OSD memory target, max or whatever it is, right? But it would do this by host. I can't remember if it's colon or slash. I think it's colon here. That lets you set these, the config limits scoping things that map to specific crush things. So it could just do it by host. And then when you do a Ceph config dump, you could see all the different OSD limits set on a per host basis, which would be not too verbose. And you could actually see what's happening. And then the reconciliation loop in Ceph ADM will look at what the running pod's memory limit is and what the config option says the memory limit should be. And if they're different, then it'll just restart the pod. Actually, it doesn't even have to do that because it's a config option. It doesn't even have to have a reconciliation loop because you can change the OSD memory target to a running daemon. It only has to do with the limit changes, and we're not changing the limit. We're setting the request.
If we deploy a daemon or remove a daemon from a host, and we need to adapt it.
Sorry, say it again.
If we imagine we have we need to split the memory target equal across all the daemons on that host.
Yeah.
So if we have half the daemons,
then
each daemon need to have more memory. Right. So whenever we deploy or remove a daemon on one host, we have to adapt it for that host.
Yep. So, but the Ceph ADM code would basically look at the running daemons, and it would look at the config option. If they don't match, it would update the config option. But then I think it'd be done. Yeah. It doesn't have to restart the daemons. There was a
Never seen the syntax before. OSD colon host equals foo.
Yeah, it's almost never used. I can't even remember the right syntax, but that's. I'm just looking at this. We have a whole pad that has 1 million notes on here, and it had a much more complicated approach, and I'm trying to remember if that was really necessary or if we were overcomplicating it.
We originally had the idea of setting the memory limit on the containers and not using the config option, but we decided that we actually do not need to set it on the container and make it much more simpler if we only use OSD memory target.
Yep. So it's simpler both because we don't have to redeploy the containers and also because you can a little bit more transparent.
Yeah. So by that we've simplified that a great deal.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. It's going to get super complicated if you have to deal with OSD memory target and the memory limit.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But we still need to care about a CPU limit at some point.
Yeah, we don't have that. But Ansible didn't do that either, right?
I don't know. Miguel Daniel, do you know?
Sorry?
Does Ceph Ansible support setting the CPU limit for containers?
Yes, I think so. Yes.
So do we have a config option for that? Or do we have to put it on the container?
I think that's a container thing. Because that relies
Then
on the
how do we want to do it? Do we want to
kernel.
use the memory target special? Or do we want to make the resource unit, the resources equal between CPU and memory targets? So do we want to have one code path that does both for containers, even if it's complicated, or do we have two different code paths? One.
Well, here's the thing. I don't think that the Ceph Ansible CPU thing is auto-tuning. I think it's just setting a limit, right? It's not taking the number of CPUs and the number of OSDs and dividing and dynamically picking a number, right?
Yeah. I think that you are right, Tate. Let me. I'm
just setting a limit is. So the thing I want to avoid is that you have 5 OSDs in a server, you deploy the 6th one, and it has to go restart all the other 5, right? And with memory, because we're divvying it up, we either have to restart the containers with new limits, or we can just adjust the config option and it'll just work. But if we have just like each OSD should use no more than 4 cores, or that they belong to a OSD class on this, a shared class on the server, they're all in one bucket or something like that. I think that makes more sense. But I guess I'd be inclined to just deal with the CPU thing separate and deal with that. Come to it later. Yeah. Because I'm guessing what we actually want is like a view class on the server for like all OSDs. And you set that big bucket to have 16 cores for the whole server for all OSDs, and they all belong to the same pool. Which I think you can do with that, with the systemd weirdness. Whatever. I think it's possible, but I've never done it before.
If we can get away with just making it simple, why not?
Yeah. Okay.
I have to jump.
Right.
Okay.
Have a good one. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. See you next week.
Bye.